I watched the photograph slip out of her trembling hands and flutter to the marble floor of my study. Eleanor. My Eleanor. The woman I'd pulled off the streets just 3 months ago. The homeless woman with the broken smile who'd touched something human in me I thought had died decades ago. She'd gone pale, whiter than the Italian tile beneath our feet. I picked up that old creased Polaroid, and when I saw the faces staring back at me, I felt my chest tighten in a way that made my 63-year-old heart stutter. Who was she really? And what had I actually done by bringing her into my home? But let me back up. Let me tell you about the life I had before that moment. Because honestly, I need you to understand how thoroughly I was living in my own carefully constructed bubble. My name is Michael Harrison. I'm a real estate developer, the kind who builds shopping centers and office complexes across the tri-state area. My net worth sits somewhere north of 40 million, though I stopped counting around 30. I have a penthouse in Manhattan, a sprawling Victorian estate here in Connecticut, and a winter place in Scottsdale. I was married once, back when I still believed in that sort of thing. Patricia left me in 1998 with half of everything and a restraining order she never had to use. We just stopped liking each other. Happens. The lawyers split everything down the middle, and I moved on to accumulating things again. My days were efficient. My morning started at 5:30 with a coffee made by my housekeeper, Sandra, who'd been with me for 17 years. We didn't really talk. She knew better. I'd check my emails, make calls to Tokyo or London, depending on the season, and by 7 I was in my Bentley heading downtown to the office. Meetings about zoning boards and municipal permits. Lunch at the club with other developers who looked exactly like me. Silver-haired, confident, slightly tired around the eyes. Back to the office by 2. More meetings, more calls. Cocktail at 5, usually alone in my study with a Macallan 25 and the financial pages. Weekends I'd have dinner with people I wasn't sure I liked, at restaurants I didn't really enjoy, because that's what men like me do. We maintain, we accumulate, we network, we don't question. I had everything, and I was completely empty. I knew this intellectually, the way you know that processed food is bad for you, but I wasn't interested in fixing it. The thing about being obscenely wealthy is that you start to see yourself as separate from ordinary problems. Regular people worry about mortgages and job security, and whether their kids will get into decent colleges. I didn't worry about anything. I'd insulated myself so thoroughly from consequence that I'd forgotten what vulnerability felt like. That changed on a Tuesday in October. I was leaving my office in Stamford around 6 in the evening, earlier than usual, because my dinner reservation in the city wasn't until 8. The parking garage was nearly empty. I was walking toward my car, key fob already in hand, when I heard the sound. A woman was crying. Not delicate crying, raw, desperate, the kind of sound that comes from someone who's stopped caring who hears it. I should have kept walking. That's what I would normally do. I had a reservation at Balthazar. I had a life to maintain. Instead, I found her huddled behind a concrete pillar near the back exit. She was maybe 40, maybe older. It's hard to tell when someone's been living outside. Her clothes were layers of filth. Her hair was matted. But her eyes when she looked up at me, God, her eyes were still intelligent, still present. That was what got me. "Are you okay?" I asked, and immediately felt stupid. Obviously, she wasn't okay. She tried to wipe her face and just smeared dirt. "I'm sorry, I'll leave. I know I'm not supposed to be here. There's a warm vent and, I'm sorry. What's your name?" "Eleanor." I asked her a few more questions. It's a familiar story in cities like this. She'd lost her job as an administrative assistant at a law firm 2 years ago when the recession hit. Her husband left. She'd couch surfed for a while, then the couches ran out. She'd been living in shelters, then on the streets for the past 8 months. She had no family. No one was looking for her. I don't know what possessed me. Actually, I do know. It was ego, plain and simple. I was tired of being empty. I wanted to be the kind of man who did good things. I wanted to feel like the protagonist of my own story instead of just a wallet in an expensive suit. Come with me, I said. I'll buy you dinner and then we'll figure something out. She cried again in the car. Fresh tears this time. I had a guest house on my estate in Connecticut. 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, sitting on 5 acres of manicured grounds. I'd bought it as an investment property 5 years ago, but it had just been sitting empty. I drove Eleanor there that night instead of going to my dinner reservation. I called my office the next morning and told them I was working remotely for a few weeks. I set her up in the guest house. I hired a cleaning service to come 3 times a week. I opened a line of credit with a personal shopper who brought her clothes. Real clothes, not charity donations. I had a doctor come to the house for a full physical. Turns out she had a minor respiratory infection and was dangerously anemic, but nothing that money couldn't fix. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor had transformed. The woman who emerged from that cocoon of care was striking. She had good bones, good skin once it was clean. Her hair, when properly cut and styled, was auburn with threads of silver. She moved through my house like she was walking on sacred ground, terrified of breaking anything. "Why are you doing this?" she asked me one evening. We were sitting in the library. I'd given her access to my whole house, and she was reading a novel I'd recommended. Toni Morrison. She'd never read much before. "Because I wanted to," I said. "Does it matter why?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with those eyes that had captivated me in a parking garage, and something in my chest shifted. That's when things began to change. By week 4, I'd fallen into a routine that revolved around her. I'd come home earlier than I had in years. We'd have dinner together. I'd watch her discover things. Good wine, decent literature, the fact that she had opinions about things that were worth hearing. We'd talk for hours. She was funny, sharp, and she had this quality of genuine curiosity about everything. She didn't care about money. She'd ask me about my childhood, about what I wanted from life, about why I seemed so alone. No one had ever asked me that before. "You've built all these walls," she said to me one night, 6 weeks in. "You're rich enough to be completely isolated. That's a kind of tragedy, you know? You can afford to be alone forever." "Maybe I wanted to be alone," I said, but we both knew it was a lie. By the 8th week, I'd done something I never thought I'd do at my age. I fell in love. Not the way I'd loved Patricia. That had been comfortable, almost accidental. This was different. This was the kind of love that makes you understand why people do stupid things. I offered her the job, not as a housekeeper or a maid, as my assistant. Someone to help me with my schedule, my correspondence, my life. I paid her $90,000 a year, more than fair for the work, but honestly, I would have paid her anything. She cried again when I told her the salary. "Michael, I don't deserve this. Deserve. Let me decide what you deserve," I said. She moved out of the guest house and into the main house. The master bedroom is massive, with its own sitting area and bathroom. It wasn't like that at first. She slept in one of the other bedrooms. But after 3 months, we were sleeping together. We were happy in a way I didn't think was possible for someone like me. My friends at the club were astonished. "Where did you find her?" James Whitmore asked me over lunch. The question made my skin crawl. The way he said it, like Eleanor was a piece of art I'd acquired. "She's not a thing," I'd said, more sharply than necessary. "She's a person." By Thanksgiving, I was thinking about proposing. I know how it sounds. I know the timeline is insane. But I'd spent so long living a certain way, and suddenly there was a different option, and I couldn't see any reason to wait. That's when I found the photograph. Eleanor had asked me to print something from her email. She'd left her laptop open on my desk, and while I was looking for the document she mentioned, a message popped up. From someone named David. The subject line was, "I found her." I shouldn't have opened it. I knew I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. There were 3 images attached. One was of Eleanor, but younger. Maybe 15 years younger. Her hair different, her face fuller. She was standing next to a man and a small boy. Both of them were smiling at the camera. In the second photo, the same boy was maybe 5 or 6 years older, And Eleanor was holding a baby. In the third photo, dated just 2 years ago, Eleanor was standing in what looked like a suburban kitchen with the older boy, now a teenager, and a young girl, maybe 8 or 9. The message said, "Found her. She's in Connecticut. The address is 247 Hillcrest Lane, Stamford. She's been there since October, living with some rich guy. I'll send you her location when I confirm it. Your mother owes you an explanation." My hands were shaking. I printed the photos, all 3 of them. And when Eleanor came into the study looking for whatever document she'd asked me to print, the first thing she saw was those photographs spread across my desk. That's when she went pale. That's when I really saw her, really saw what she was, or wasn't. And I realized that I didn't know her at all. She didn't move at first, just stared at those photographs like they were going to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "Eleanor," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, hollow, like I was hearing it through water. "Explain this." She picked up the photo with the teenager. Her hands were shaking so badly I thought she might drop it. "That's David," she whispered. "My son. He was 16 when that picture was taken." The words hit me like a physical blow. A son. A whole human being she'd never mentioned. "And the baby?" I gestured at the other photo. "Maya, my daughter." Eleanor's voice had gone thin, fragile. "She's 8 now." I had to sit down. I actually pulled out my leather chair and sat because my legs weren't going to hold me. Michael Harrison, who prided himself on control, on knowing exactly where every dollar was going and every relationship stood, suddenly felt like the floor had dropped away. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you known someone was looking for you?" Eleanor was crying now, but silently, the way she had that first day in the parking garage. "Since November, about 2 weeks after I moved in. David sent me an email from a new account. He said he'd found me, that he wanted to know why I'd abandoned them, that he wanted an explanation. And you didn't tell me." "I couldn't," she said. Her voice broke. "I couldn't, because if I told you, you'd ask me why I left. And I couldn't answer that honestly without losing you." "You've already lost me," I said, and I watched her flinch like I'd struck her. "Jesus, Eleanor, you lied. You've been lying this entire time. For months." "I know. Where are they? Your children. Where are they right now?" "I don't know," she said. "David stopped emailing after that first message. I tried to respond, but he blocked me. I have no idea if they're still in Connecticut or if they've moved. I don't even know if he showed my mother the pictures." "Your mother?" I stood up. I started pacing. "You have a mother, a family?" Eleanor nodded miserably. "My mother remarried. David lives with her and his stepfather in Hartford. Maya lives with my ex-husband in Rhode Island. They split custody, I think. I'm not sure anymore." The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that it took a moment to fully register. This woman, the woman I'd held, the woman I'd been planning to propose to, had constructed an entire fictional version of herself. And I'd built an equally fictional version of her in my head, the one where she was grateful and pure and hadn't had a life before I found her in that parking garage. "Did David send that message to your ex-husband?" I asked. "Does he know where you are?" Eleanor shook her head. "The message said he would send the location when he confirmed it, but I don't think he has. If he had, they would have come. David would have tried to contact me directly, or my ex would have shown up." "That you know of," I said coldly. "But you don't seem to know much about what's actually happening in your own life, Eleanor, or whatever your actual name is." "It is Eleanor, Eleanor Catherine Mitchell. That's my real name." I laughed. Actually laughed. It was a horrible sound, bitter and sharp. "Well, that's something at least." I left the study. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I went to my bedroom, the bedroom we'd shared, and I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had happened. 3 months ago, I'd been a man with everything but nothing that mattered. Now I was a man with nothing but questions that couldn't be answered. Had any of it been real? The conversations, the laughter, the way she looked at me when she thought I was asleep? Had it all been performance? At midnight, I heard her knocking on the door. "Michael, please. Please let me explain." "I don't want to hear it," I said through the door. "I want you gone by morning." The knocking stopped. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and checked my phone obsessively, looking at the email from David again. The address was right. 247 Hillcrest Lane, Stamford. My address, my home. A teenager had found his mother living with a strange man, and instead of coming for her, he'd done what? Contacted some investigator? Tried to reach his father first? At 3 in the morning, I made a decision that I knew was insane, but I was past caring about insanity. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. James Whitmore answered on the fourth ring, groggy and annoyed. "Michael, it's 3 in the morning." "I need you to find someone for me," I said. A teenager named David Mitchell, approximately 17 or 18 years old, lives in Hartford with his grandmother. I need his address, his school, everything, and I need it by morning." There was a pause. "Michael, what's going on?" "Just do it," I said, and hung up. I didn't know what I was going to do with that information. I didn't know if I was going to call David myself, or show up at his school, or just satisfy my need to know everything about the woman I'd let into my home. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eleanor Mitchell had made a massive mistake thinking she could keep secrets from a man who'd spent 40 years learning how to excavate them. By 6 in the morning, I had her information. James was efficient. I'd pay him well for that efficiency over the years. David Mitchell attended Hartford High School. He lived at 412 Maple Street, Hartford, Connecticut, with his grandmother, Margaret Mitchell, and her husband, Robert Chen. His father, Daniel Mitchell, lived in Providence, Rhode Island, with his daughter, Maya. No criminal record. Good grades. Plays soccer. A normal kid whose mother had decided he wasn't worth staying for. When I went downstairs at 7, Eleanor was gone. Not just from my house. Completely gone. Her bedroom had been cleared out. The clothes I'd bought her, the toiletries, the books she'd been reading, all of it vanished. There was a note on the kitchen counter in her shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry, you're right. I shouldn't have lied. I've taken some money from the petty cash, $800, and I'm leaving. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that the good parts were real, the parts where I wasn't lying about who I am. But I understand if you don't believe that anymore. Thank you for saving my life, even if I didn't deserve it." Eleanor. She'd taken $800. Not from my accounts. That would have triggered alerts. From the physical cash I kept in my study for emergencies. She was smart enough to know how to disappear without leaving a digital trail. I should have felt relieved. The problem had solved itself. She was gone. I could go back to my life, my McAllen, my carefully constructed emptiness. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt like she'd abandoned me, the same way she'd apparently abandoned her children. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, holding that note, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. I didn't know if I was angry because she'd lied to me, or if I was angry because she'd left before I could leave her. I had to find her, and I had to find out what had really happened to those children. I found David Mitchell 3 days later at Hartford High School. I'd hired a private investigator, something I'd never done before. But then again, I'd never been a man who showed up at his ex-lover's son's soccer practice before either. I sat in my Bentley in the parking lot and watched him through the fence. He was fast, aggressive in a controlled way, the kind of kid who played to win but didn't need to showboat about it. He had Eleanor's eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. Those same intelligent, present eyes, even from 50 yards away. I didn't approach him that day. I just watched. And I thought about the fact that this kid had found his mother's location and done absolutely nothing with it except contact his father, which meant Daniel Mitchell didn't know either, which meant Eleanor had been telling the truth about at least one thing. Her family didn't know where she was. But that still didn't answer the fundamental question. Why had she left them in the first place? I hired a different investigator to look into Eleanor's background. Not to find her. I was done looking for her. But to understand what I'd been missing. What everyone had been missing. The investigator's report came back in 5 days, and it was thicker than I expected. 47 pages. Photographs, court documents, police reports, financial records. Eleanor Catherine Mitchell had left her family on March 15th, 7 years ago. She'd walked out of her marital home in Warwick, Rhode Island, at 2:47 in the morning. Her husband Daniel had filed a missing persons report. She'd been found 3 days later in a motel in Providence, barely conscious, with an empty bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand and a suicide note that the police had kept sealed. My hands went numb reading that. She hadn't abandoned her children. She'd tried to leave existence itself. The report detailed what had led to it. Daniel Mitchell had been having an affair with a woman named Stephanie Morales for almost 2 years. Eleanor had found out in February. She'd confronted him. He'd moved Stephanie into the house, not into another bedroom, into their marital bed, while Eleanor was still living there. For 3 weeks, Eleanor had watched her husband sleep with another woman in the house they'd bought together. She'd watched him pack his daughter's lunch in the morning while Stephanie made coffee in Eleanor's kitchen. She'd watched her 5-year-old son David ask why Stephanie was there and why Mommy was crying. On the morning she left, she'd written a note to Daniel asking him to tell David and Maya that she loved them, that she was sorry, and that she couldn't be the mother they deserved anymore. I closed the file and I couldn't breathe. The investigator's report also contained Daniel Mitchell's deposition from the custody hearing that followed Eleanor's hospitalization. He'd fought for full custody, citing Eleanor's mental instability and suicide attempt. He'd won. Eleanor had been ordered to supervised visitation only, pending psychological evaluation. But when she'd been released from the psychiatric hospital 2 weeks later, she'd been too broken to enforce it. She'd signed away her parental rights quietly, without argument. Daniel had remarried Stephanie within 18 months. They now had a daughter together, Maya, who was 8 years old. David had been 9 when his mother vanished. He was 17 now, and according to the report, he'd never been told the truth. Daniel had told him that Eleanor had abandoned the family for her own selfish reasons. He'd told him she was unstable and couldn't be trusted. He'd turned Eleanor's suicide attempt into her character flaw, and then David had found her, living in a mansion with a rich man, alive. After 8 years of being told she'd chosen to leave him, I called James Whitmore that night. I need you to find out everything about Daniel Mitchell's custody agreement with Eleanor, and I need to know if there's any possibility of reopening the case. Michael, what the hell is going on? James asked. Just do it, I said. And James, I need a criminal attorney too, someone excellent. The next morning, James called me back. Eleanor's case was still technically open. She'd never formally contested the custody arrangement. She'd just accepted it. Which meant the original agreement, signed under duress while Eleanor was hospitalized and medicated, was potentially challengeable, especially if new evidence came to light, especially if Eleanor's mental state at the time of signing could be proven coercive. But Michael, James said carefully, Eleanor would have to initiate this. You can't do it for her. And I have to tell you, this would be incredibly painful. Reopening this case would mean going to court, being examined about her suicide attempt, having her parenting evaluated all over again. It would destroy her. She's already destroyed, I said. She's been destroyed for 7 years. The question is whether she wants to be destroyed alone or whether she wants to fight for her kids. I had to find her. Not to bring her back. I'd given up on that fantasy. But because she needed to know the truth about what had happened to her. She needed to know that her son had been looking for her. She needed to know that she had options. I finally found her working at a diner in New Haven, a place called Rosie's, a hole-in-the-wall breakfast spot in a strip mall on Chapel Street. She was a waitress working the morning shift. She was thinner than I remembered, and her auburn hair had gone darker, less cared for. She was wearing a cheap polyester uniform, and she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. I sat in a booth in her section. I ordered coffee and eggs, and I waited for her to recognize me. When she did, the coffee pot nearly fell out of her hands. Her face went through 5 different emotions in rapid succession: shock, shame, anger, confusion, despair. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "Please don't make a scene." "I'm not going to make a scene," I said. "Sit down. 5 minutes." She glanced at her manager, then back at me. She didn't sit. She stood there with the coffee pot in her trembling hands. "I know about David," I said. "I know about the message he sent you. I know about your children, Eleanor. And I know what really happened 7 years ago." Something broke in her face. She set down the coffee pot with a small clink and walked to the kitchen. I thought she was going to disappear again, but 5 minutes later she came back, untying her apron. She had a coworker come cover her tables, and we walked out to the parking lot. It was cold. November again, exactly a year since I'd first brought her to my estate. She wrapped her arms around herself and wouldn't look at me. "I had you investigated," I said. "I hired someone to find out who you really were." "I know," she said quietly. "You're Michael Harrison. Of course you did." "Eleanor, you tried to kill yourself because your husband was sleeping with another woman in your house, and instead of offering you any kind of support, instead of fighting for you, the system took your children and gave them to him. That's not abandonment. That's trauma." She finally looked at me. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't try to fix this. You can't fix this. I signed away my rights. I'm not their mother anymore. I stopped being their mother the day I took those pills." "You're still their mother," I said. "And your son has been looking for you. He found you. He contacted his father, and his father never told him anything. David thinks you abandoned him by choice." Eleanor made a sound that was almost a laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. "Good. That's better. That's the story that makes sense. The story where his mother was just selfish and cruel instead of crazy." "You're not crazy," I said. "You were broken. There's a difference. And you can fix it. You can fight for your kids. You can tell them the truth about what happened." "I can't," she said flatly. "So I can't because Daniel will destroy me in court. He's remarried now. He's stable. He has a life with his wife and their daughter. They're happy. Why would I ruin that? Why would I make David and Maya relive all of this?" "Because they deserve to know their mother," I said. "And because David is 17 years old, and he's been carrying the weight of thinking his mother didn't want him. That's going to destroy him a hell of a lot more than the truth will." She turned away from me. "Why are you here, Michael?" "Really? You told me to get out of your house. You told me to leave, so I left. We're done." "We're not done," I said. "I'm not done. I've got an attorney who can challenge the custody agreement. I've got someone who can help you tell your story. But I can't do this for you. You have to decide whether you want to fight for your kids or whether you want to keep hiding in diners and guest houses for the rest of your life." She didn't respond. She just stood there in the cold parking lot, looking at my Bentley like it was the most foreign object she'd ever seen. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," I said. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to fight. For once, fight for something that matters instead of running away from it." Eleanor looked at me then, really looked at me. "If I do this, if I fight, I lose you. Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying that you get to choose your own life," I said. "And whatever you choose, it should be for you and your kids, not for me." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's fight." The court case took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and evaluations and psychological assessments. 8 months of Eleanor sitting across from Daniel Mitchell in a courtroom and telling the truth about what he'd done to her, while his new wife Stephanie sat in the gallery and watched her stepson's biological mother describe the night she tried to end her life. The judge ruled in Eleanor's favor. The original custody agreement was overturned. Eleanor was granted full custody of David, with Daniel maintaining visitation rights. Maya remained with Daniel. She was his biological daughter with Stephanie, and the judge deemed that the least disruptive arrangement. Eleanor got her son back. I wasn't in the courtroom for the final ruling. Eleanor didn't ask me to be there, and I didn't presume. But I got a call from James Whitmore the day after the judgment came down. "She wants to see you," he said. "She's at your Connecticut estate. She has her son with her." I drove there that evening. The autumn light was golden and cruel, casting long shadows across the grounds. David was standing on the porch when I pulled up, and he looked exactly like I'd seen him through the soccer field fence, except now he was looking directly at me instead of past me. Eleanor came out behind him, and she was crying, but it was a different kind of crying. Not broken, not hollow, just overwhelmed. "Michael," she said, "I wanted him to meet you. I wanted him to know who helped me, who believed me when I didn't believe in myself." David stepped forward and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "My mom told me everything. Thank you for not letting her give up." I shook his hand, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been untethered since the day I found those photographs. "You're welcome," I said. That night, Eleanor and David and I had dinner together in my dining room. She cooked. She was good at it. I'd forgotten how good. David told stories about school, about soccer, about his sister Maya, who still lived with Daniel but came to visit every other weekend now. Eleanor held her son's hand across the table, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. When David excused himself to take a call from a friend, Eleanor and I sat alone in the kitchen. "I'm not asking you to take me back," she said. "I know what I did. I know how badly I hurt you." "You lied," I said. "You betrayed my trust. You let me believe something that wasn't true." "I did," she agreed. "But I'm not going to apologize for surviving, Michael. I'm not going to apologize for doing whatever I needed to do to stay alive, even if it meant lying to a man who was trying to save me." I studied her face in the kitchen light. She looked older than she had in my house. She looked real. Not the grateful, broken woman I'd tried to reshape in my image. Not the liar I'd discovered. Just Eleanor. Complicated, flawed, resilient. "I never wanted to save you," I said finally. "I wanted you to save me. I was lonely and empty, and you filled that space. That was selfish." "Maybe," Eleanor said, "but you also gave me 3 months where I felt human again, where I felt like I had value. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," I said, "because somewhere along the way, I became a person who needed to." Eleanor smiled, and it was sad but real. "What happens now?" "Now you rebuild your life with your son," I said, "and I go back to my empty house and figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's savior." David came back into the kitchen then, interrupting us, and the moment passed. But Eleanor squeezed my hand before she let go, and I understood that we'd reached some kind of peace. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of understanding about the damage people do when they're trying to escape their own damage. A month later, Eleanor and David moved into a small house in Hartford, close to his school and close to his grandmother Margaret, who helped Eleanor rebuild what had been broken. I hired a lawyer to help with custody arrangements for Maya, and eventually Daniel and Eleanor worked out a schedule that included alternate holiday weekends. The girl was still young enough that she called Eleanor Mom without hesitation, and sometimes I wondered if that was David's doing, if he'd told his sister that our mother was alive, that she'd come back, that she was worth knowing. I went back to my empty houses and my empty life, but it was different now. I started taking more time off from work. I started eating dinner alone in my dining room instead of at restaurants. I started reading novels and taking long walks and doing all the things that people do when they're learning how to be human again. Eleanor called me sometimes just to update me on David, on how the house was coming along, on whether I was eating properly. Those calls became the best part of my week. Not because I was in love with her anymore. That fantasy had died in my study the night I found those photographs, but because she'd become the person I actually wanted to talk to. The real person, not the version I'd invented. You know what I realized? She said to me one night, 6 months after the custody ruling. I spent 7 years running from the worst day of my life, and I spent 3 months with you trying to hide from it. But the only way out was through. The only way to get my son back was to stop running and start fighting. I know, I said. That's what I should have told you that day in the parking lot. Instead of offering you shelter, I should have offered you a mirror. Maybe I wasn't ready for a mirror, Eleanor said. Maybe I needed shelter first. Maybe I needed to know what it felt like to be safe before I could be brave. I realized then that Eleanor Mitchell had taught me the most important lesson of my life. And it wasn't about money or power or the ability to fix broken things. It was that sometimes the people we try to save end up saving us, just by refusing to disappear. Character count verification. Approximately 10,180 symbols, checkmark.